Hey everybody, this is Matt from Matt's Fantasy Book Reviews, and today I'm doing my second part in my series of the top 100 best fantasy books of all time, according to me. Today we're going to be going through numbers 90 through 81. If you missed the previous video, go ahead and click the link up above to see that. So let's just jump right into it with number 90, and this is Skysworn. This is part of the Cradle series by Wight, and this was written in 2017. This was book 4 of 12, and there's currently 11 books written already. So if you're one of those people that likes to read already completed series, you can go ahead and start this one because the last book's coming out later on this year. This book series is essentially a progression fantasy book, and progression fantasy, really quickly, is think of like an RPG video game where you have your main character constantly leveling up and getting stronger as the series goes along. That's what this is. The main character starts out as nothing, and eventually by the end of the series is going to be like the most powerful being, in the history of ever. And it's that journey from point A to point Z that you're going along with this character. In this book in particular, what I really liked about it was it was the beginning, I think, of the real story, and it will always have a special place in my heart for being that. Without spoiling anything, the main character gets a major body upgrade. I won't say anything more than that, but this upgrade is so important for the rest of the story and develops in so many ways as it goes along that it's fun to look back and see where that all began. I also loved that the new, bigger enemy is revealed. In this story up to this point, you're not entirely sure who the big bad is. You kind of think you know who it is, but in this book, it really does get revealed, the crux of the major story and the major conflict that's going on here. And that's really fun. I also thoroughly loved the ending of this book. It's got this battle sequence, and I don't think you'll ever read a book that has a bigger set piece than what's going on here. And I won't ruin what that means, but if you've read this book, you know what I mean by, bigger. I'm not saying it's the best or the most large scale, but when you understand the size proportions of what's going on here and they start putting it in context with things that you already know of, it's awe-inspiring, and it's so wonderful to just picture this enormous fight going on, and it puts the grandness of the bigger scope of what's going on and the conflict in way more identifiable terms, and it's really fun to read about. So if you haven't read the Cradle series yet, I highly suggest you do. If you're a fan of a darker story, a more serious, super well prose, this isn't really the series for you. But if you like something a little bit lighter, a little bit smaller books, kind of more video gamey, this is, the quintessential best story for that sort of mold. So yeah, I highly recommend Cradle. Number 89, and this is going to be Return of the King. Obviously, this is Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, and this was written in 1955. And I feel like I can talk a little bit spoilers here, because if you're watching this video, there's about a 100% chance that you've either seen the movies or read the books. So I will say that, what I loved about this story was, even more than the story itself, I love the ending. I love both parts of the ending. What I mean by that is I love the culmination of Frodo and Sam's journey, where they're finally accomplishing the journey that that they will accomplish from early on in the first book, but they're finally there. You went through all those trials and tribulations with them. You're so happy for these little hobbits that are, bigger than kings now and have achieved the impossible. And I love a good story like that. And it's fun to read that and see how much influence that's had on modern day stories. I just love so much about that. I also thoroughly enjoy something that not a lot of people love, and that is the scouring of the Shire. That is, after the story is done, they go back to the Shire, investigate the problems that have gone on there, meet some old characters that are involved, and get some closure on the next stage of life for all of these characters. And what I liked about this was how different it was. And it's weird to, compare Lord of the Rings to being something different because so much has been copied. But if this book was written today, very quickly after the ring was destroyed, the book would end. No book would drag it out into going into this depth and telling essentially a side story. But I liked that. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I thought it was a very good fitting ending to this story. So you really got to feel, what the next stage of life is in store for all of these characters, even though they might not be, major grand things, but it's fun to read about. Number 88 is going to be Oathbringer. This is part of the Stormlight archive by Brent and Sanderson, written in 2017. This is the third book of 10. There has been 4 written. And this book is so good. It ultimately is my least favorite of the Stormlight archive, but it shows a lot that my least favorite of these 4 books is on my top 100. But, in famous Sanderson form, the reveals are jaw-dropping, and they do that amazing thing, and it's the hallmark of a good twist for me, is when you could have seen it coming, but you failed to. That is a well put out twist. I hate it when a twist just slaps you randomly and it feels unearned. And anybody can do that, but it takes a lot of skill to put the clues out there already that you could have pieced together if you were smart enough. I'm not smart enough to get almost any of these twists. And that's why I'm ultimately so shocked, not just because of the shocking reveal, but the fact that, oh man, I could have had it way earlier, but I didn't. And it makes you want to reread these books very badly. I can't wait to do my reread of these. I'm putting it off a little bit because I have so many books to read and they're so enormous that it takes quite a bit of time investment to read through these. But I loved it. The one part that I did not love about the books as compared to the others is, the Sanderlanche at the end. That is the avalanche of events that happens at the end of every Brandon Sanderson book, where all the characters come together and they're fighting their major conflict that this entire book has been leading to. And while it was good, it doesn't compare to the rest of the series, and that it was too large. It was almost a parody of itself in how grand it was, how long it was. I thought it could have been scaled back a little bit to be a better ending. But I know I'm in the minority on that, because when I've read reviews of this book after I did my review of the book, I saw that was most people thoroughly enjoyed about the book and loved the most about it. So just a personal taste thing, but still, wonderful book and an amazing series. Number 87 is Red Seas Under Red Skies. This is the second book in the Gentleman Bastard series by Scott Lynch, written in 2007. This is the second book out of 3 total done, and who knows how many there are going to be. There might not ever be another one, because Scott Lynch is in that category with Patrick Rothfuss and with J.R.R. Martin, where their last book came out a long time ago, and they've been writing their next book for seemingly ages, and there's not a lot of confidence in the book community that any of these books will actually come out. Now, Scott Lynch, I understand why it hasn't come out. He has come out and mentioned that he has been struggling with mental health issues as a result of the criticism he got for his third book. He has confidence issues, he has stress revolved around putting out stuff and not getting a good reception. But, I heard he's taking medication, he's working through it, and he wants to start releasing stuff again. So I'm all for it. And I can't wait to read the next one. I think that these books do they've gotten worse as they've gone along, but that they're still all wonderful, and I love them. I think I gave the third book a 4 out of 5, which is a very good score. But this book is wonderful. This series is about a band of thieves. They're the world's greatest thieves, led by Locke Lamora, who is definitely the greatest thief. And every book is about a major heist that goes on with tons of twists and turns along the way. It's got a dark feel to it, even though it's got this lighthearted banter that goes along. It plays those two things very well. I also thoroughly love the buddy relationship between 2 of the main characters, Locke and Jean, and they're like the greatest buddy duo in the history of fantasy, and I just love them so dearly. I also really love that this book took place almost entirely in the open seas. I love a good fantasy story that takes place on the ocean. Think like Live Ship Traders or Bone Ships. This is right up there with the greats. I know that's a very specific subgenre, but it is wonderful. I love it. And to be going on this heist, I love the hijinks of they've got a very clear point A to point B that they have to journey on, but man, do they get sidetracked with these other side quests that they don't want to be on. And I love that. I did feel the ending was a little bit rushed. It just kind of happens all of a sudden, but still, that doesn't take away from what is a wonderful book. Number 86 is The Rage of Dragons. This is part of the Burning series by Evan Winter, written in 2020. This is book 1 of 4. There's been 2 currently done. I think you read this book for the world building. The world building is so good in this book. It's got a very unique thing to it in that it is a African-inspired world where everybody is black. I love that. It's so different. It's so common to read books that you feel like are just a fantasy version of England or something. No, this is way different. And I've read several books that have the Asian-inspired thing to them too, but never the African-inspired, and it's really fun to see that. This book has so many things that I like. It has the Cradle thing where you have a character that starts out as nothing and nobody expects him to amount for squat, and he ends up achieving enormous heights. I love that. I also love a book that has a good school setting, a mage school kind of thing, and this book has that. I love a book that has a good tournament setting where, a tournament with established rules, people got to go up against each other in like a set format. This book has that too. I also love a book that tells a story of a world where there are other events going on in different places in the world. Think like Wheel of Time, where you have the main event going on the one continent. I forgot the name of the continent. But then you have the Shan-Chan, who are coming from a different continent, coming over to wreck shop. And you have this sense of wonder about, like, man, what's going on over there? What's the stories going on over there? But the story isn't telling that story. And it makes the world so much bigger and better in my mind when there's that sense of mystery. You got that in A Song of Ice and Fire, where there's these distant lands, but you don't really get to find out a ton about them. You get little teases here and there, but not a deep dive. And it just improves the world so much for me. And this book, had that in spades. It is a little bit of a cookie cutter story. It's not the greatest story ever told, but it is an highly enjoyable read, and I highly suggest people get into it if they're looking for something a little bit different. Number 85 is The Blinding Knife. This is the second book in the Lightbringer series by Brent Weeks, written in 2012. This is book 2 of 5. The series has been completed. And I thought this was the best of the Lightbringer. A lot of people say book 3 is the best. For me, book 2 is the best. And it improves on book 1 in virtually every way. The pacing was awesome. The characters are improved, the ones that are written, and a new character is thrust into the forefront, 𝐭𝐸, who is one of my top 2 or 3 favorite fantasy characters of all time, right behind like 𝐳 from the First Law. He's a very similar character to 𝐳. Maybe I like that darker role. But he plays this evil man who you can't help but root for almost, or I can't help but root for, because of how well they're written. Every scene that they enter is amplified an enormous amount. And I just love seeing this, how smart and witty they are and evil, and they go through a lot of character progression as the story goes along, as you find out about them. And you question, like, are they really evil or are they just darker character? And man, I love 𝐭𝐸, and I love Kip, the main character of the story, the one that the Lightbringer this book is named after. And he just subverts so many of the common tropes that you would associate with a fantasy book, where he is overweight. He knows he's not good looking. How often do you read a fantasy character that is, the best looking, the best, the strongest, all the women want him or all the men want the woman, and that's not Kip. And I love how unsure of himself he is. In his internal monologue, he's constantly ragging on himself. He's trying to project a stronger front than he actually feels internally. And he knows he's not the best, even though everyone else knows he is. And that's a really fun dynamic and something that I don't get to experience very often. I'm used to these characters that project this enormous confidence, and that is not Kip. And so, I love that. This book is so wonderful. Unfortunately, the series gets a little bit worse as it goes along. The last book is unanimously agreed on as the worst of the bunch, but it's still a wonderful series. And even though the last book is kind of, stands up there on the pillar of bad endings for a fantasy series, it doesn't take away what is a wonderful series for me. Number 84 is Deadhouse Landing. This is in the Malazan universe. It is part of the Path to Ascendancy series by E.N.C. Esslemont, written in 2017. And most people think that Malazan is written by Steven Erikson. Not true. It is written by 2 men, by Steven Erikson and E.N.C. Esslemont. They're friends. They developed this universe together. And while Steven Erikson is the more popular, E.N.C. Esslemont does this wonderful thing where he tells these side stories. He tells stories that, were not central to the Book of the Fallen, but these offshoot stories where you get to hear more about these side characters, where continents will be mentioned, and we will now go investigate those continents with a really fun story to go along. And I love that. There's so many different plot lines that I wished I heard more about in Book of the Fallen that his series go down. Now, this series in particular is a prequel series for 2 of the main characters. Well, not main, 2 of the characters. Kellanvet and Dancer, the people that lead the Malaz Empire at the beginning of the series. And what I loved about it is this book, as opposed to book 1, goes back to Malaz Island, a place that we're very familiar with, where you get to see a lot of the main characters in this story in their prequel story. And it feels like fan service when you're first reading it. It's like, man, did this really need to be told? I'm a big proponent of the fact that some stories end well and you don't need to know more about them. I apparently did need to know more about this because, man, it's good. And what's really skillful for me is that the author was able to take characters that were not written by him. They were written by Steven Erikson, but write them, and you would think that Steven Erikson wrote them. They're so well, put together and perfectly canon, and I just love how well it was done, and such an enjoyable experience learning more about these characters. And it had the classic, amazing ending that Malazan books are famous for. And yeah, couldn't say enough things about Path to Ascendancy. And if you're one of those people, one of the many people that read Book of the Fallen but decided, I've heard not great things about 𝐭𝐡𝐢𝐬, Esslemont, I'm not going to do it, you are doing yourself a disservice. You need to go read these books. In fact, just turn off my video. I don't need the rest of your ad revenue. Go get his books. Go read them right now. What are you doing? Go do it. Number 83 is She is the Darkness. This is part of The Black Company by Glen Cook. This is written in 1997. This is book 7 of 9. This book has been completed for a very long time. These books were written in the 80s, maybe early 90s. Very quickly, what The Black Company is they are a mercenary company of men that don't care what side they're working for, whether it's bad or good or a mix in between. In the very first book, they're working for essentially like the Wicked Witch of the West. And they're okay with that. They're getting paid. By the time this book has come along, they are doing their own thing. They're going back to find out their origin story. The Black Company always has an analyst. This is essentially the person that writes the stories of what happened as they go along. This is a very, this book has kind of like a Vietnam War memoirs kind of feel to it, even though it's, in a purely fantasy world and, not modern technology, but it gives that gritty feel to it if you've ever read something like that. But what I most love about these stories is that, and this one in particular, is this one shifts perspective to a new analyst. This is the third time I believe that it shifted to a new analyst, and the entire way that the book is written has changed. The entire book. And an entirely different perspective. And it's so magical how well Glen Cook can write. He is a genius when it comes to writing these characters in the way that they see the world in a very different perspective. The entire writing style's changed, and it's so good. This book is wacky in a good way. I mean, one very quick plot line just to show you how bonkers things are is you've got this, this disembodied ghost of a comatose wizard that one of the characters is using to bend time and space to go from point A to point B. And it feels very Malazan, quite frankly. And the reason for that is Steven Erikson, when he was writing Book of the Fallen, used this book series as his inspiration in a lot of ways. Maybe not the only inspiration, but it was a big influence on him. So it's really fun to read that as a Malazan fan. I also loved that the characters are finally at their final destination and learning the mysteries that go along with that. And the final battle was so good. So, yep, wonderful book. Go read The Black Company, start with the first book, and you can even read that book as a standalone, but you got to give it a shot. Number 82 is Underlord. This is another Cradle book. This is by Will Wight in 2019. This is book 6 of 12. And I don't need to go tell you what Cradle's all about because I just did, but I will quickly say that I love the enormous jump in power, and the title of this book kind of gives it away a little bit, but I love how strong these characters are getting by this point. There's this tournament setting. You also heard how I love tournament settings. That these characters are trying to enter a tournament, and the tournament is full of awe for the reader because the gifts that you get for winning this tournament or getting, second place, top 4, top 8, top 16 are mind-bogglingly huge. That's how important this tournament is and how badly you want to see these characters get in it, go as far as they can, see what the rewards are. It's super fun to see. One of the rewards that anybody who enters the tournament is they get their own private island airship, and that's the lowest of the gifts that you get. So think about how grand they do get. Teleportation devices, things that can essentially make you kill anybody for free and without even thinking about it. And it's crazy and fun and huge, and I love it. There's also this fun subplot of these two rival nations going against each other, and these characters trying to prove themselves for why they should be sponsored by their family to enter this tournament on their behalf. So wonderful book. And number 81 is Blood of Dragons. This is in the realm of the Elderlings. This is part of the Rainwild Chronicles sub-series by Robin Hobb, written in 2013. The realm of the Elderlings is a 16-book series. This is book 13 of 16. This is also part of the Rainwild Chronicles, which is the quartet that is the 4th of 5th sub-series. There's essentially 5 trilogies, but one of them's a quartet. This is the last book in that. And this whole series has been completed, so you got to get on it. The character work in this book is incredible. The character work in all of these books is incredible. But what made me love this one so much is everyone agrees that Rainwild Chronicles is the worst of the Realm of the Elderlings books. But I think a lot of people either gave up on it or just skipped this book. But it's criminal to skip this book on how good it is. It takes that slow pacing from the earlier books and ramps up the pacing to 11. It is balls to the wall the entire way. And oftentimes that can be a pacing problem in itself because things are going too quickly. But no, you needed that because of how slow everything else went up to this point. I love that it took these tertiary characters that were kind of a little bit mentioned in the earlier books and really brought them home here. And I also love, in retrospect, when you read the final trilogy here, how important this series is to that story and how much it intertwines. It's so good. And so if you're one of those people that are reading these series and you read the second book and you're like, that was trash. I'm hesitant to call it trash, but it certainly didn't work for me. I hated it. Either power through, because the last trilogy and the ending to the story is incredible, or read a synopsis if you have to, but don't quit Realm of the Elderlings when you're so far and you have such an amazing story to be told. So that is my number 90 through 81. Next week, I'm going to be doing 80 through 71. I hope you can join me. And as always, happy reading to you.